Hello there, and welcome to OnEdge Sports. I'm your host, Sheldon Woolman, here with Austin Host.
Hello.
And today we will be giving you an in-depth analysis and also our predictions for the NBA playoffs here as of April 22nd. Today, we would like to start talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, the best seed in the NBA, had the best record. Giannis Antetokounmpo, obviously their leader, and they're obviously cruising through the Detroit Pistons so far this series, taking a commanding 3-0 series lead. Not much to talk about from this series, despite, just their dominance through the playoffs so far, which was a question due to their lack of playoff experience, winning rounds. So it's a good sign for them. And interesting here, as the Boston Celtics did move on to the second round already, that it will be the team they would be playing as long as they do not collapse the last 4 games of the series, if it were to get to that point. They only have a positive 3.3 points per game differential over Boston this season, which is the lowest differential they have over any other NBA team so far this year. So that is the only real interesting thing to note about this series so far. Next, we'll kick it over to Austin here with some in-depth analysis on the Sixers and the Brooklyn Nets.
So the Sixers and the Brooklyn Nets have been a very interesting series, as Brooklyn was able to take game one, and everybody was shocked by that. And D'Angelo Russell looked like a true leader, something that Magic Johnson said he'd never be, and that's why he was traded for such a low cost. And I think the Nets are surprising everyone as their sneaky playoff team. But in the end, it's going to be Philadelphia who's going to take this series, and they're just going to move on just because of the star power. And like Spencer Dinwiddie and D'Angelo Russell, they're not enough to carry this Nets team. They've been very good this season, but I think their season is going to be coming to an end. Great job by D'Angelo Russell, who had an all-star year, and Spencer Dinwiddie had a great year as well. There's been a little bit of controversy with Jared Dudley and Ben Simmons, as you saw over the past few games. But I think this has been very good for basketball, and this series has been actually more interesting than I thought it was going to be. So I'm looking forward to seeing the Sixers move on.
Yeah, definitely. I'm with you right there, Austin. Next, we look at the Boston Celtics series. I touched on that a little bit earlier when I was mentioning the Bucks, but the Celtics ended up sweeping the Indiana Pacers, taking Game 4 in Indiana at Bankers Life Fieldhouse. Interesting series. The series was closer than a 4-0 series really portrays. A lot of close games that came down to the wire. In fact, Indiana led at halftime of 3 of the 4 games that they ended up losing. Boston did a great job in the second half of pretty much every game, though, holding Indiana to, I believe, 35 points per game in the second half, which is an extremely low amount. You look at the Celtics here, and this was a series that no one expected them to lose, and they went there and took care of business. Gordon Hayward had a great Game 4, important to note, as he did play in Indiana in high school. So it's great for him that he's starting to look a little bit better for the playoffs. They definitely need him if they want to make some noise. And it's important to note that the series might have been a lot different if Victor Oladipo was healthy this year without his quad injury. You never know. Maybe Indiana's moving on to the second round here. They were definitely looking like a top team when he was playing, top 3 seed. They ended up falling to the 5 seed without him, but still a very productive year for them nonetheless. Nate McMillan deserves a lot of props for what he did with that team, and very good season overall. All right, moving on to the Toronto Raptors versus the Orlando Magic. Austin, what do you think about this one here?
Well, I think Toronto's doing what they were coming here to do, and they're going to take this series. Obviously, the game 1 was very fluky. DJ Augustine hitting the game winner. Nobody thought that the Magic had any chance of taking one game in this series, but Kawhi Leonard is doing his thing. He's able to put up 30 when he wants to, and people saying he's not the best two-way player in the world, they're out of their mind. I think Kawhi Leonard's a top player in the East, or, between him and Giannis, but I think Kawhi Leonard's just so good defensively that it's hard to not give him that title. But obviously Orlando does not stand a chance to come back in this series. Kyle Lowry's not playing like a true number 2, as he's been really slipping in the playoffs, especially with his first game performance. There's a source that said he had a very good game 1, but that was not obviously true. I see he scored 0 points. And I just think that Toronto is a team that's very dangerous moving forward, even though the slip up in game 1, every team has one of those slip up games in the playoffs at some point. And I think they got theirs out of the way, and it will not harm them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Toronto, I think, is my favorite to end up winning the East when we get to that portion of the episode. I do think Kyle Lowry is the guy to watch for them. I think he will be important in if they end up making enough noise to become a true contender or not, as the second leading scorer on that team. But here we'll kick it over to the West. And Austin, why don't you give us what you're seeing over in Portland versus Oklahoma City with Lillard and Westbrook?
This has been definitely the most interesting series to me. Obviously, going into the series, there's a lot of anticipation. Lillard versus Westbrook. Clearly, Oklahoma City is searching for answers as they're down in the series, but everybody thought that it was going to be a for sure upset. They were ruling out Portland because of the injury to Nurkic, but Damian Lillard is he's been going off this series, and McCollum's been very nice. Overall, it's been pretty impressive what Portland's been able to do, but it's been kind of a crisis there in Oklahoma City. You look at Russell Westbrook's not been playing well, and Paul George is not that two-way player everyone was saying he was during the regular season. That's why regular season playoffs are way different. It's a different feel. And I think Oklahoma City needs to go back to the drawing board. Something's got to change because all these early playoff exits for them with, 2 stars, I don't think that cuts it in the future.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there on that. Pretty interesting. Paul George is averaging over 28 points a game in the series, but only shooting 37%, and that's the shooting woes you mentioned. And that just can't happen from your 2 best players to combine for about 35% from the field in a playoff series. You're not going to win any playoff series like that. Moving on to the Rockets versus the Utah Jazz. This was a series I was very interested in seeing how the Houston Rockets dealt with the size of the Utah Jazz and their defensive system. The Jazz have been defending James Harden similar to how the Milwaukee Bucks did during the regular season, with a defender guarding the back hip of Harden rather than trying to stay in front of him. And for the most part, it hasn't worked. Harden's averaging over 28 points a game with that, including a 32-point triple-double in Game 2. I did start out Game 3 historically bad, the worst start to any playoff game by any player of all time, 0 for 15. But at the same time, he still finished with 22 points, including 3 for 6 in the fourth quarter, pouring in 14 points that quarter and the clutch game-sealing 3 with under half a minute to go. So despite Harden's, lackluster Game 3, they ended up still being able to pull it out with huge buckets by him down the stretch. And I think that's the big thing that you want to see is even if Harden wasn't getting his shot to fall, the team was able to hold them into a game by, shutting down Utah, holding Donovan Mitchell to a poor shooting night as well. And that's what you need to see from the rest of your guys around Harden, because it's not very often that Harden's not going to be hitting his shots like that. So I think the outlook for Houston's great going forward, and I think they're going to wrap this series up in 4. Now we're going to look over to perhaps the most exciting series to watch from my standpoint so far has been the Golden State Warriors and the Los Angeles Clippers. Austin, tell us what you're seeing over there as a local Clippers fan.
Yeah, so the Clippers they've looked okay in this series. Obviously, the blowout was not good, but they've held their own against the greatest team of all time, arguably the greatest offense of all time. I think that holds true here. Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, one of the best trios you'll ever see offensively, if not the best trio. They've been doing a lot of different things defensively for the Clippers as they've matched up Patrick Beverley on Kevin Durant, and that boded well for them initially. But Kevin Durant has obviously gone off in the series after his lackluster in the loss against the Clippers when they blew their big lead. He fouled out, and it just was not a good look for Kevin Durant, but he kicked it into full playoff mode as he's been dominating since then. However, the Clippers, it's not going to be enough. Their miraculous comeback in one of the games, it's tough for a team like this that has no true superstar to keep up with a team full of stars. Danilo Gallinari, arguably the best player, has not shown up in the series. He's been atrocious offensively. Field goal percentage is not looking good. Also, he has too many turnovers leading to transition for Golden State, and you never want to give up transition buckets against Golden State because they will kill you every single time. But I think this is a wrap for this series. The Clippers don't really have a chance, but a pretty impressive season for the Clippers to get this far. Everyone was shocked they even made it. So you got to give props to Doc Rivers and the crew for making it this far.
Yeah, I was going to ask you quickly, go off a little bit from the schedule here. And what do you think the series has for implications for the Clippers in the offseason here? Do you think this will be a turning point for free agency or what they do in the draft, anything like that? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so basically what this series does is sets them up beautifully for the offseason, as Kawhi Leonard has been rumored there for the last year. And I think that still holds true. And I think it just makes it even look better now that they don't have a true superstar now. And if you add a guy like Kawhi Leonard to this team, that they could be Western Conference Finals contenders. I just think that this team is ready to make a run at some big free agents. They've been the laughingstock of LA for years in terms of free agent destinations. They've had great players in the past, like Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, but in terms of picking up free agents, they've been just a laughingstock. And I think the tide has turned for them, and I think the franchise is moving in a great direction.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you there on that. I do think the series has set them up very well for this 2019 offseason and the future after that. Next, we'll look at the closest series so far, the Denver Nuggets versus the San Antonio Spurs. We're all knotted up at 2 apiece as of April 22nd. And I just kind of want to see what you think here on Derek White and Jamal Murray and what your kind of X factors are for the rest of the series.
Yeah, so I think it's been very interesting. Nobody expected this coming out of Derek White, who's been pretty much a role player his whole career, and Jamal Murray, he's a certified bucket getter. But I think it's been a great matchup between those two, exchanging buckets. Of course, Greg Popovich is going to pull off his magic, and that's why the series is knotted at 2 apiece. But Greg Popovich continues to do his thing with role players and washed up veterans. And as you see, like LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan, guys that you would not expect to be leading a playoff team against this high-powered offense, they're still doing their thing. I just think that the Spurs are very underrated, and I think the big X factor is if Derek White can keep up the pace he's been at, because he's been keeping them in these games.
All right, yeah, I'm in complete agreement there with you again. I would like to hear who you think ends up pulling out this series. And why?
I'm gonna go with the Denver Nuggets just solely on I think that they're too offensively gifted to not win this series. They're better on paper. Coaching wise, obviously goes to Popovich, but I just think that Denver needs to make a statement here and get out of this first round, as they were disappointing last year not to make the playoffs. But I think this year, like Jokic, it's his time to step up. He needs to prove that he's a leader, and obviously he has not done very well in the playoffs in terms of scoring. I think he just has to step it up these next few games, but I got Denver.
All right, yeah, I have San Antonio. I do think this is the closest series out of all the series. It's very difficult to not pick the Denver Nuggets based off the names they got. I definitely do think that the series implies that Denver will not be moving past the second round. If they do end up moving past the Spurs, just, Jokic should be taking more advantage of Jakob Poeltl than he has been, or LaMarcus Aldridge, two below average defensive big men in the NBA. And unfortunately, to this point for Denver, he has not really to the point where, a true superstar should be. But I do think the Spurs will end up pulling it out just because DeMar DeRozan hasn't been playing super great so far this series, and I do think he'll turn it up a little bit down the stretch of this series. It will be difficult to take one of the two games in Denver that you have to take if you're San Antonio, but they did take one of the games already in Denver, so I do think they can do it again. But I do think it'll be a 1-point, 2-point game in Game 7 if it comes down to it. All right, so I think we're in agreement here that the Bucks will move on past Detroit, that the 76ers will beat Brooklyn, and that the Raptors are going to move past Orlando. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, I agree.
Okay, and then I think we are both in agreement that Portland, Houston, Golden State will also move on.
Yep.
All right, so now we're looking at the second round, and we're going to have Milwaukee versus the Celtics. Where are you at on that series?
That's a very tough matchup there, because obviously Boston kind of relatively has Milwaukee's number in terms of, like you were talking about, the points per game differential. I think that Milwaukee will win this series just because Budenholzer is a great coach, as is Brad Stevens, but Giannis is, the second best player in the world right now currently. arguably. And I just think that this team's ready to make a run. It was great that they got Brooke Lopez, and Middleton has been great this year. And I see this team being able to, hold the Celtics off. And like, the Celtics haven't been great this year. They've looked pretty good in the playoffs. I just don't think this is the same magical run that they're going to have like they did last year.
Yep, I completely agree with you there. I think Milwaukee's defensive schemes will really help them move past Boston. I think they're going to be able to phase out Jason Tatum and Kyrie Irving a little bit more than Indiana could do with defenders like Bojan Bogdanovic rather than Giannis and Bledsoe and Brogdon, hopefully, if he's back. But he might not be back. But even without him, I do think the Bucks end up winning in either 5 or 6 games. I do not see a Game 7 even in this series, which I'm sure you probably agree with as well. Then we look at the 76ers versus Raptors. If our predictions hold true, who do you like in this series and why?
Well, I'm going to take Toronto in this series. Obviously, an easy answer for the casual NBA fan would say the 76ers due to the star talent that they have with Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, Ben Simmons, and Joel Embiid. I just think that the Raptors are better coached. They have the best player in the series, and they have a great bench, and Philly is very, very thin on their bench. I just think that'll be the key factors. Once the benches come in, I think the Raptors are going to smoke the 76ers in that sense. So I have the Raptors moving on here.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I believe Toronto takes this series in either 5 or 6 as well. I think defensively, Toronto matches up the best with every team in the league. They got Kawhi Leonard, who I believe is the best two-way player in the world. Danny Green's a way above average defender. Kyle Lowry's one of the best defensive point guards in the NBA yet. Then you look at Pascal Siakam, who's a huge X factor offensively and defensively for them. Probably has the best spin move in the NBA right now. And then you're looking at Marcus Gasol creating out of the post for you offensively. I just think they have too much for the 76ers to be able to contend with. Despite the star power, I think Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris didn't mesh together as well as they were hoping. Obviously, both of those players worked well off of Simmons and Embiid by themselves, but the two of them on the floor, just the spacing isn't quite what they wanted there. And I think Brett Brown is in danger of losing his job after that series as well. Then going over to the West for the second round of the playoffs, we would have Houston versus Golden State, and also Portland versus Denver or San Antonio. So we'll jump over to Portland versus Denver for you, Austin. What do you think's going there?
Really, this is tough, but I think Portland in this series would take that. Obviously, they have a little more experience in the playoffs, and I just think they're a better team. Damian Lillard has been outstanding. CJ McCollum has been pretty good throughout these playoff series, and just how Denver has handled San Antonio, it's really telling of how they're gonna do in the next round. Nobody's gonna be able to defend Lillard because Denver's a horrible defensive team. The only decent defender is Millsap, and you are not putting him on Lillard. So Jamal Murray's terrible defensively. So I do not see anyone stopping Damian Lillard. He's the X factor. He's the everything for this Portland team. Portland moves on.
I'm in agreement there, even though I picked the Spurs. I do think Portland will be actually in the Western Conference Finals this year, which is a huge improvement over their sweep against New Orleans last year. I picked the Spurs to go forward in the series, and I do think that the Spurs will give Portland a little bit more of a test than Denver would in the next round, just because of Popovich being such a great defensive head coach. But I do think that Portland would probably still win that series pretty sure-handedly. I just think Damian Lillard came out this playoffs to prove that he is the guy that you want, and he's all NBA first team, all NBA second team type point guard. It's hard to bet against him in a series like this. Then we'll look over to Houston Golden State. What do you got for us?
I think this is going to be just like last year. It's going to be a really close series. I think it's going to go to 7 games still. One concern that we had for Houston was them losing Trevor Ariza. Obviously, at the start of the season, it kind of showed because of the horrible start that they got off to. But obviously, they corrected things, and they've been great ever since the very start of the season. But I still have Golden State in 7. I just think that Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, it's just too much for Houston to handle. I think they're gonna figure out something to maybe slow down Harden a little bit. I doubt it, but I just think that when you have that many weapons, if somebody's off, on a night, they just go to somebody else. I mean, Curry's crazy. He can go off at any night. Any one of those stars, except for Draymond, can go off at any night. And I just think they are just so good offensively that it's tough to stop.
I definitely see your point there. It's hard to pick against that trio, but that is what I'm going to do here. I do think Houston will end up taking the series in 7 games in Oracle. I think the last game in Oracle will be a loss for the Golden State Warriors in Game 7 in the second round of the playoffs. I was 100% sure about this when DeMarcus Cousins was healthy, but now that DeMarcus Cousins is hurt, I'm a little more tentative about it because Andrew Bogut gives the Warriors more offensive rebounding, and Kevon Looney is a better defensive player than Boogie Cousins was. So it's a little bit tougher now because they switch better defensively and they get more chances at the rim and also on kick-out threes off of a Bogut rebound. So that's a little tougher for Houston to contend with, but I believe that James Harden, just how Curry came back and got his unanimous MVP, came back way better the following season. I think James Harden has done the same thing. He's been in his bag this year, 36 points per game. I do think that Chris Paul will need to be healthy. If he's not healthy, then they don't have any chance. I think they lose in 5 if he misses some of that series or anything like that. And I do think all the games will come down really close down to the wire. But just looking at the regular season this year, Houston ended up going 3-1 against Golden State this year in the regular season, I believe. They just are hungry against Golden State. They want to beat Golden State. They're the most inspired team in the NBA, I believe. And I think that they will be able to pull it off this year in a very, very close Game 7. All right. And then to the conference finals now, we got the Bucks versus the Raptors. Austin, tell me what you're thinking here.
This is definitely the hardest game to pick up to this point. You got to love Giannis and everything that Milwaukee does, but at the same time, Toronto has been fantastic this year, and Kawhi has sat a lot of the games. But I think that the Toronto Raptors will come out of this series. I just think that Nick Nurse has done a great job this year. Kawhi Leonard is fantastic. He's going to give Giannis the most fits that he's had all year. When you match him up on him the entire series, you're going to want to try to make Middleton do everything. You want the ball to have to get out of Giannis's hands, and the best way to do that is put the best defender on the planet on a guy like Giannis. And I think it's going to be a 7-game series, and I think Toronto will come out of it.
I agree with you completely there. I do believe it is also going to be a 7-game series, and I do think Toronto ends up winning it. I think Toronto just has too much shooting and too much defense to really contend with. For Milwaukee to contend with, I think Milwaukee gives up the most threes per game in the NBA, which so far has worked for them, especially when you're playing, bad teams during the regular season. That really helps you. But I think the defensive switches that Milwaukee often does, pulling Giannis out of the corner as like a free safety, I think that will end up hurting them with Pascal Siakam in the corner. And just the way he can function for a team. And I think Kawhi Leonard defensively is just going to, win them a quarter here or there, and it's going to really make a big difference for the overall outcome of the series. And I think Toronto will end up pulling it out. All right. Then now yours would be Warriors Portland here. What are you seeing?
I think this is going to be a pretty easy series for the Warriors, as Damian Lillard, his time will run out, and the Golden State Warriors will take control of this series. Probably, I think it's going to be a 5-game series. And I just think that this team offensively, once again, I have to hone in on that they're the best offensive team of all time. And I just don't see Portland being able to keep up with it offensively, because you have guys like Aminu who they're going to force to try to make shots, and those kind of guys. And like Cantor's not a big offensive threat. He's a great rebounder and everything, but he's not going to be able to carry the load. So if you're able to isolate out of the offense Lillard and McCollum, I think it's going to be pretty easy for the Warriors to take advantage.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I do think Houston will end up beating Portland at that point. But obviously, if the Warriors do end up beating Houston, then the Warriors will also walk through Portland in that case. Portland, they got a lot going for them, but they really desperately need better wing players if they want to make that next step from a conference finals type team to an actual finals team. That's where they really need to hit that improvement. It's a bummer that they lost Nurkic because the depth would have helped them. But at the same point, it's pretty difficult for them to deal with that. All right. Now looking into the finals, we've got Toronto versus Golden State or Toronto versus Houston, depending on which one of us. What do you think there?
Yeah, so this is going to be the Warriors' toughest series, as the Toronto Raptors have so much depth, and they have a guy that will be able to match up on KD well. And as you stated earlier, that Kyle Lowry is a pretty good defensive point guard to put on Curry. Danny Green on Klay Thompson, that's going to give them the most fits. I think this is probably going to go to 7 games, but I think the Warriors will win it. Toronto's going to give them a lot of troubles defensively, and also Toronto is able to shoot the 3 ball with them, but I just think that Golden State will take the series and will repeat again.
Yeah, I think the Houston Rockets are going to win the finals over the Toronto Raptors in 6 games, I believe. I do not see them being able to go into Scotiabank Arena in Toronto and win a Game 7 if it came down to it. So I think it would have to be in 6. And I think that Toronto, for all the reasons that they're a good team, I don't know if they can keep up with a guy like Harden, depending on who they put on him. Obviously, the first thing you think is put Kawhi on Harden, but then you don't want Kawhi sitting there on ball guarding Harden for every dribble and having to use his all of his energy defensively. And then then the questions arise about their offense on the other end. And I think that also the pick and roll between Harden and Capella will be the hardest thing for Toronto to stop with, especially when Gasol gets in the game. I don't think he moves his feet well enough to really provide issues there if that series is what ends up happening. And that's why I think Houston will end up winning in 6. All right. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. Leave some comments below if you have any thoughts or disagreements with us, and we'd love to hear it. All right. Thank you.